Thank you, and good morning, and welcome to the Columbus Region Logistics Council's Industrial Real Estate Briefing. I'm Brandon Embrews, Senior Audit Manager with the firm Schneider Downs. We are a presenting partner of CRLC's event series. I'd like to thank you for joining us. To learn more about the latest trends in industrial real estate in our Columbus region. Today, we will hear perspectives from tenants, brokers, and developers to help inform your next real estate move. Schneider Downs is honored to be opening today's program. For those of you who are not familiar with Schneider Downs, we are a full-service accounting and business advisory firm. We began back in 1956 with 2 guys and a dream. We've grown organically over the past 60-some years to be a firm of over 500 people with offices in Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Washington, D.C. We've been here in Columbus for around about 30 years now, and we focus very heavily in the transportation and logistics space. If you have any need for audit, tax, or consulting services, we would love to help you out, get to know you better. But enough about Schneider Downs. I would like to now welcome to the stage Zaki Bashir, Manager of the Columbus Region Logistics Council, to kick off today's program. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are you all? So, like you said, my name is Zaki. I'm the manager of the Columbus Region Logistics Council. A little bit of background: the Columbus Region Logistics Council is an initiative of the Columbus Chamber. Came into existence in 2009, so about 13 years ago. And the task and mission of the Logistics Council is to have the conversation similar to the one today that drive the industry. As you all know, Columbus is a major hub for logistics internationally and of course here nationally. So the mission of the Columbus Region Logistics Council is to have conversations, convene those key stakeholders to have conversations like the one we're having today. So thank you, Brandon, for the introduction, and thank you, Jeff, for kicking today's event off. Ease Logistics is a sponsor, and they were not able to make it today, so a bit about Ease. Ease Logistics is a multi-operational supply chain and transportation solution. They provide accelerated innovation services that help deliver the products and goods of select clients by means of highly effective global network. Their knowledgeable professionals simplify the logistics experience with our unique and unmatched customer service model. To learn more about Ease Logistics, visit easelogistics.com. So, anyone who's been paying attention over the past year or two to any of the housing market or real estate market, I'm sure you've heard that housing prices are up, lumber costs are up, everything's up, unless if you're trying to buy, now's not the time, right? You're pretty much out of luck if you're looking to buy a new property. But I wanted to have this conversation today to see how does that overlap with what's going on in our industrial space. So we have an esteemed panel today, but before we do that, I want to jump into a quick excerpt from JLL's Q1 Columbus Industrial Outlook Report. JLL is a local broker here. They have a national presence. They put out a quarterly report to talk about the space, vacancy, availability, and any trends in real estate. So a quick excerpt. The headline is, "Total Vacancy Drops Below 2% as Market Awaits Construction Completion." With total vacancy dropping from 2.2 to 1.6, a new market record for the 4th consecutive quarter, the Columbus industrial market has reached a point of dire need for new space. The construction pipeline is robust at over 13 million square feet currently underway, but much of that is expected to be completed in the second half of this year. Few warehouses have sat vacant for several quarters. One example is the 1.1 million square foot warehouse completed by Core 5 in West Jefferson during Q1 of last year. That had been the largest vacancy on the market since its completion. Home Depot, who's a Columbus Chamber member, leased the entirety of that building in Q1 of this year, which played a major role in that vacancy number dropping from 2.2 to 1.6. With such low vacancy rate, availabilities are either recently delivered or soon to be expected. So here to talk about that today, we have an esteemed panel, and I want to introduce Kurt Berlin, on the industrial team at NAI Ohio Equities. Jeff Green, Assistant City Development Director at the City of Groveport, and Phil Racing from Vice President of Development at Van Trust. So I'll kick things off with you, Kurt. We have a presentation here. Kurt's going to talk a little bit about the expectation of a broker and the expectation of a client.
So,
Can you hear me now? Okay, good. All right, great. That's fine. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the key asked me to talk about a couple months ago, and I said I would, and then about 2 weeks ago, I said, what we're going to talk about. So I needed to know what we're talking, so we weren't sure. So I really want to talk a little bit about the expectations of tenants and really more than brokers, but more tenants. 2 years ago, you had many options available. Vacancy rate was over 5%. So you would go out and look for space, and you could send RFPs to 5 or 6 people. There was existing buildings up. You could get occupancy quicker. You didn't need to get permitting. You could get paint and carpet existing office space, and so you could get occupancy quicker. Lease rates have 20% might be on the low end. They're up at least 20% versus a couple years ago. Tenants are really experiencing sticker shock if they haven't been out to the market recently. It's tough to make a phone call with tenants and say, hey, let's represent you on renewal or go out to the market. Their rates going from 3 to 450. So it's very, the market's very tight. Short-term leases were possible a couple years ago. Probably 18 months ago that stopped. Landlords do not want to, will not do short-term leases. You could get a 1 or 2 year lease at that point in time. That's not the case anymore. And 2 years ago, our job as brokers was to negotiate the best deal possible for the tenant. Still try to do that, obviously, but in doing so, with the market as tight as it is, you face a real possibility of losing the space if you're trying to nickel or dime or quarter the last quarter. So if you're occupying 100,000 square feet and you save a quarter square foot, that's $2,000 a month. You want to risk losing the space over $2,000 a month and not be able to operate. So now, fast forward to today, vacancy rate, as he said, is below 2%. There are very few options. There's like I said, 13 plus million square feet of construction coming online, but that is not here, so it takes longer to occupy. You've got to build the office space out, you've got to permit it. And lease rates are 20% higher. Landlords require a 5-year term right now because it's not bare minimum, especially on the new buildings. And the goal has gone from negotiating the best deal to just secure the space for your client so they can be in business. So, with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the relocation process for tenants. We have a timeline that we just use as a generic timeline for our clients, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say first thing you can do is meet with your broker. But that is truthful. They can. I can totally tell you a good broker will help you manage the process and get through it easier. And then the tenants, if you're out there, you need to look at your renew versus new decision, do your needs analysis. If you can renew, check to see if you might have a fixed renewal rate. If you do and pre-negotiate it, we're probably going to emphasize that option if you don't need more space. But if you decide you want to move, then you're going to go out and do your market analysis, tours, and in this situation, you probably have a couple people you can send RFPs to. It's very, very tight market. If you have 3, you're lucky, or more. I'm working on a current deal right now where we're just thinking about making an offer for the space as opposed to going through the RFP process. The RFP process takes a little bit of time. You prepare the RFP, you send it to the landlord responds, and you look at it and respond back, and that can go back and forth a couple of times to eat up some time. And in the meantime, somebody comes in and leases some space, if the market's tight as it is, you may just be better off in today's world to go ahead and make the offer for the space. And then it wasn't really trying to negotiate best terms, but still want to negotiate the best terms possible, but securing the space is more important. And I say when you're in the lease process, hire a good attorney. They're invaluable to get through the lease process, and that's taking a lot longer now than it had previously. It seems like every attorney is at least a week to respond. So then once you locate the space and you secure the space, you're going to go through the permitting process. You got to go to the people in the municipalities to get the permitting for your racking and the fixtures. Once that's done, that can take some time to get your architectural drawings as well. Then you go through tenant improvements. Phil and I were talking about this a little earlier. I mean, 120, 150 days, you're starting from scratch with the supply chain issues there are right now. That's moving pretty quick. Used to be that you could say maybe 90 to 120, but that's trying to stick them longer now than it has in the past. Then you've got to install the racking and new fixtures, and then you really, you have to really go to move in. But I think one thing, just from that movement perspective, is for tenants that are out there, is to look at your negotiate the lease, look at your delivery dates when that's probably hard to get absolute drop dead date with supply chain issues right now, and look at when your domestic starts to make on that. So that's sort of where we are now in the process with tenants that we experience.
Thanks, Kurt. And before I pass it to you, Jeff, quick question. At what point of the process should a client or a tenant begin to reach out to a broker?
Early, very early.
As soon as they have the idea of the space. Okay. All right, next, Jeff, let's hear a little bit from you about the landscape of all things real estate down in the Groveport area.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm the development director for the city of Groveport, and this is a position I've held since 2001. Actually, had my second interview for the job on 9/11, so created an interesting dynamic for the interview. At any rate, when I came into the job, we had probably 5 to 6 million square feet of warehouse and distribution under roof. We had land that was fully abated throughout the city. We had fertile ground for development. We had a lot of land available. And those were kind of the house yacht days for us. We were just going gangbusters. It was build a building, fill a building, build a building, fill a building. At the time, it was mostly two developers that were doing most of the development in Groveport. We had Duke Realty and we had Opus North doing a lot of it.
Coupled with the land pricing, it's really hard to figure out and underwrite, what's your rent going to be. I mean, you may not know what your rent's going to be until the end of the project. A lot of the projects that we've seen, we've had, again, I focus on roof, but roof is probably the biggest challenge. The TPO roof installation is really hard to get. It's hard to get the fasteners. Well, it's like, okay, roof screws. We've never talked about roof screws before, but now we're talking about roof screws. Some of those suppliers, we've got a project where we're halfway through construction, we've got a signed contract with that roof supplier, and the roof supplier comes back and says, hey, here's $1 million change order, and your roof's going to be 6 months late. Or like, okay, if we paid the ransom, can we at least get the roof? But again, back to that productivity and production, I think, there's so much demand for their product, they can't keep up with all the stuff going on. So certainly an interesting environment. Obviously, lease rates have risen. They haven't risen to account for the whole increase of the land and construction costs, but it's an exciting time. It's a strange time, but hopefully, the economic headwinds don't change that anytime soon.
So Phil, you mentioned the change order. Can you speak a little bit more about what that is and what's one of the more drastic change orders you've seen?
Yeah, so when we underwrite these things, obviously we have contingency on the kind of development side. Our contractors carry a contingency, but we've had in our new deals we've underwritten, we've added kind of material escalation, just again with the fluctuations in the roof and dock levelers and anything you think of, it's fluctuating, and you really don't know what's going to cost until it shows up. At some point, a lot of suppliers have said, hey, we'll tell you what it costs when we ship it to your site. So again, trying to manage an underwriting process, trying to give tenants a good rent to quote when everything on our side of the equation is changing. So we've been fortunate to cover a lot of that stuff in our original underwriting, but I'm sure there'll come a day where there will be a change order that we'll have to go back to our ownership and say, hey, we're over our development budget, we need more money. But so far we haven't had to do that quite yet.
So I wanted to go back to what I started with, which is that 1.5% vacancy rate. Kurt, Phil, either of you can take this question. What exactly does that mean to someone looking for space? What does that 1.5% mean? What's average? What's low? Kind of go into that a little bit more.
That is low. It's the lowest I've ever seen in my career. I've been around a while. It means there's very few spaces available, and if you need space, you need to get out in front of it, get out there early, and start to see what even going to be built as part of this 13 million square feet coming online. There's other planned developments as well beyond that. So I would say, 18 months out would be probably at this point in time about making more look, get looking into see what's going on. The other issue is like Bill said, the lease rates. There's no more quoted lease rates on these new buildings. I mean, it's basically on a case-by-case basis. It's hard from a tenant perspective because we do our sort of thing that we're doing. There's no real rate. You can give them a guideline, but if the client, if you're a 3PL and you're bidding for clients' businesses, they want to know what their cost is going to be. Everyone wants to know what the cost is going to be. It's very hard now to establish the cost of them prior to signing the contract.
Yeah, and to build off what Kurt said, I mean, it's obvious from our standpoint, the less space out there, the better. But actually, it's not that good of a problem. It's actually a big problem because Indianapolis, which is kind of our market that we compete a lot with, has about double the amount of spec space under development. So that's from 13 to 14 million square feet. Indy's 20 plus. So from a tenant standpoint, they don't like to come to market and say, hey, we only have one option to go to. Obviously, there needs to be a little bit of a competitive situation for them to look at. So the more product that we have, we're always going to see get more users to look because they have some options. If you don't have those options, they're going to go to a different region, whether it's Indy or Louisville or anything along those lines. So the vacancy, obviously, as Kurt says, the lowest I've ever seen it. If the 13 million square feet came online all at once, obviously that would tick up. But given the supply chain challenges, all that space is going to be very staggered when it delivers. So it's interesting. Obviously, we're also seeing. Historically, we've underwritten our buildings to take about a year from completion to lease up. Now we're seeing most of those are leasing up before we're done with construction, which is great for the development side. But the challenge for those users is like historically, Kurt, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're a 500,000 to $1 million square foot user, you'd be out a year in advance. 6 months to a year to look for space. That time frame is now probably 2 to 3 months. Their businesses are changing rapidly, their inventories are growing, consumer spending is obviously up, so they need this warehouse space immediately. So if they come to market and it's not there, they're going to a different region. So you miss opportunities if you don't have that stuff sitting on the ground. So, it's very interesting to see a $1 million square foot user and say, I need to be in June. I'm like, okay, we'll try to make that happen. But again, that's a huge difference from when I first started in the business. That time period of when they need to be in and occupy is very, very fast.
Let me add one thing. Bob forgot to address where we are vacancy like for normal. This is obviously not normal. After the Great Recession, we probably got a 13% vacancy rate. But I mean, I'd be more comfortable if we were at 5 to have options.
For the community, vacancy rate is kind of like the unemployment rate. Those are the two numbers we're going to track quite a bit. The unemployment rate, when it's low, that's a great thing for the community. It means tax dollars are coming in, everything is pretty healthy. But it's a bad thing for the companies who are getting ready to ramp up for Christmas season, for distribution, for companies who are looking for workforce, for new companies who are entering the market that are going to be trying to staff their warehouse and distribution centers. The same thing with vacancy rate. It's for a long time we hovered around 5%. Although people in the community insist that there's warehouses sitting empty. We just build these warehouses and they just sit empty forever. But the reality is, if there's space available, it's a fraction of a warehouse. It's very, very small. So it's really a mixed bag. I mean, it's great from the standpoint of making the community look healthy and whole, but from the perspective of the companies and from the perspective of developers wanting to enter the market or trying to find space for relocation, it's a bad thing. So it's hard to say that when you think, oh, wow, we're at 1.5 vacancy rate, but it's not always the best.
Yeah. And just so I'm clear on the map, the vacancy rate is of all the space available, how much of it is vacant? Is that the number, the percentages of all the space? Okay. Gotcha. And Jeff, Phil mentioned a little bit of that pain of trying to attract the business to Columbus versus in Indianapolis. As Growth Forward, the city of Columbus started to feel that organizations choosing another location because we don't have the space here in Columbus?
Are we losing? Yeah, we absolutely are. But it's funny how tenacious these developers are. They don't take no for an answer. They know there's some land somewhere. We have space that is immediately adjacent to our existing industrial area, and it's right at Rickenbacker Airport. It's nice land. It's kind of an assembly. They would have to assemble several properties to make it happen. But we have a developer from Chicago who is insisting he's going to develop that land. The only problem is it's not even in our service area for Columbus. It's not in any of our service areas. So we have to go to Columbus City Council and ask them to amend it. Columbus City Council or the people in development at the City of Columbus don't want to do that until we have a larger conversation about what we're going to do with Area C. So meanwhile, this guy calls me every week. Where are we in the planning? What's going on? What's going on? It's kind of heartbreaking though to look a developer in the eye and say, we've got nothing. I don't know what to tell you. Right now, this is where we are. This is our reality.
So Phil, I know we spoke about this a bit earlier, but there are some people, whether in the community or just naysayers, that say we're building too much too fast. So when you kind of look at a 5-year perspective, is it possible, or what do you say to someone that thinks it's possible, that we'll end up with a lot of space empty because we built spec buildings too quickly?
I don't think we've ever heard building. I'm sorry, was that for you?
No, go ahead.
Full disclosure, this guy left the house without his hearing aids this morning. Yeah, at the ripe old age of 29, I had to start wearing hearing aids. So if you see me doing this, you know why. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so, developers always can ruin a really good market by putting up a lot of space, so it's certainly a possibility. Obviously, the last 2 to 3 months, there's a lot of headwinds in the economy with inflation and wars, and I think the thing that we really need to watch is the consumer spending. Obviously, most of the tenants, as Jeff said, are e-commerce based, for our stuff. So if you're buying online or you're buying in a retail store, that starts to dip because everything else is too expensive. That's going to be an interesting thing to track. But I think, the CEO of Prologis kind of outlined just the demand for the next, he's never seen a better market in his entire career. And a lot of that is, inventories to sales ratios are still down. These retailers have not been able to restock their inventories. Obviously, they've been selling a lot of products. So, there's statistics anywhere that if inventories rise 10 to 15%, which basically get the product in the States so they're not having supply chain issues and have it weighed on boats in California, that 10 to 15% increase could probably create another billion square feet of warehouse demand. So you have that as a demand driver. Obviously, e-commerce continues to grow, so that's another demand driver. And then, just building your supply chains with resiliency. Where again, you can't make a sale if you don't have the product. So getting that product, back in, onshoring, whether it's manufacturing or warehousing space, I think fundamentally it's still very strong. But obviously, there's a lot of noise in the economy that could give us a little bit of a hiccup. So, but again, even if that 13 million square feet came online, we may be at 5 or 6% vacant. So, while it sounds like a lot, we always talk about it, well, let's lease our buildings as fast as we can before something happens. It's still historically not that much space.
Jeff, you got a comment?
We do have one vacant building right now, but there are no windows and no parking lot. It's under construction, the supply chain issues are stopping it in its tracks. I'm still surprised no one's moving in yet. It's an interesting time for everybody right now. It's kind of crazy. But like I said, we're having to do things to make sure that the community understands what's happening in these warehouses. We really didn't have too much too soon. It was a fairly steady process. It was just a constant process. In fact, now they think these are just warehouses being built for the sake of warehouses. But at the same time, they'll talk about all the increased traffic because of all these warehouses. So it's interesting being in the community and having to deal with those issues too, plus having to deal with people like this.
Well, and I'd also say is like, you know, obviously we're doing, most of our development is spec development, so obviously we don't know who the tenant is. But we see user demand, obviously e-commerce is a big chunk, but we've seen light manufacturing. So, you know, again, we've heard the same thing being in zoning meetings from residents of like, well, these are all vacant. I'm like, well, we'd be fired if these are all vacant. They're not vacant, they're leased, and there's no space out there. But we're seeing a lot of different types of companies that come in and lease our buildings. Obviously, the stuff in New Albany that we've developed, 3 of the 4 tenants were manufacturing. So they're coming in doing injection molding, putting in paint lines. So, you know, from a community standpoint, the users have gotten very sophisticated at what goes in there. They're not necessarily floor stacking boxes anymore and moving them out the door. I mean, there's material handling equipment, there's you know, big office component, there's maybe some light assembly. So the tenants have gotten a lot more sophisticated and more stuff is going on inside the spaces.
So Kurt, I want to talk to you a little bit about the other side of this perspective. I had a chance to speak to Matt Hartman, CEO of FST Logistics, and he spoke about his experience working with your team and how there were a lot of organizations due to the pandemic that were no longer in their spaces, no longer renewing their leases. So kind of tell me about the benefit of the past couple of years of organizations choosing not to come back to their workplaces and what that's done for organizations like FST Logistics.
Well, in an industrial perspective, we did have a hiccup for a couple of months, and then the market picked back up. From an office perspective, a lot of people haven't come back yet. And in their case, we helped them locate their office up in Dublin. And it was nice because it was a selfish situation first, and then we went ahead and direct the landlord. It creates opportunities for people to take some spaces that are becoming vacant or available to sublease. So that, you know, in the office side, which is not what particular our expertise, but it's creating the opportunities for sublease with more vacant space.
So from an office or flex lease standpoint, there is a lot more space available.
From an office perspective.
And Phil, what impact does this have on your day-to-day?
Yeah, so we develop office buildings too. It's not nearly as active as industrial, but we developed the Point of Polaris, you know, which delivered middle of 2020. Bank of America, we're fortunate to have an anchor tenant at that office building. We have about 80,000 square feet left. You know, the Class A plus type buildings are still very active. So tenants obviously need to get, I think they want to have their employees back at the office. So if you're in an older office building, it's a little less exciting to come to work. So we've seen kind of companies right-size their space and upgrade their office. So go from 30,000 square feet to 10, but you're in a nicer building. So again, the newer buildings are still very active. I think there's a significant amount of buildings that may never lease again just because of the amenity package isn't there. The windows aren't quite as big, low ceiling heights. So I think, again, things that we've talked about of you can't make more land is, well, maybe some of these functionally obsolete office buildings could become industrial sites. Or, you know, you're starting to think about knocking stuff down again, which numbers never work. But again, then you've got challenges with the communities and where you want that type of mix. But I mean, the office market is slowly coming back. I mean, we're seeing people get back to work. Obviously, you know, we're back to work just the way that we work. It's better to be in the office, but you know, it doesn't work for every company. So it's going to be probably a year or two before I think it settles out of how everything's going to work. I certainly think companies have to be flexible or hybrid work, whatever you want to call it. You know, the 5-day a week in the office is probably never coming back. But I just think there is going to be less demand for office space. And we'll see what happens with some of these older buildings that are sitting there.
Jeff, what was the impact down in Groveport with organizations that work from home, but it's a mainly industrial space? What was the give and take there?
Repeat the question again, I'm sorry.
What was the give and take for any office spaces versus the industrial space in the Groveport area?
We don't have a lot of office space. It's mostly warehouse and distribution. It was a challenge for a lot of years to try to attract anything beyond the warehouse and distribution. We had some issues with our school district, some performance issues, and kind of a lot of the, for lack of a better term, kind of inner city issues in our school district. They've met a lot of those challenges. The school district is performing well, but we've just never been a market for office space, we'd love to be. We'd love to be able to attract some of the higher paying positions. When people look at warehouse and distribution, they think it's all low pay. Walk into one of the distribution centers now and look at the level of technology that's employed in these places. But as far as office space, as far as even manufacturing, we don't have all that diverse of an economy. We just, KDC1, who is a supplier for Bath and Body Works for their hand soaps and hand sanitizers and body lotions, they just moved into the old Kmart distribution center that was built in 1982. You want to talk about adaptive reuse, and it is the most technologically advanced facility I've seen in years, but it's manufacturing for us. It's higher paying jobs. Those are the things we'd love to have. And that's what I was saying about our planning. You know, as we look at our planning, is it all going to be warehouse and distribution? Is that where our future is, or do we need to look at some other things as well? So right now it's, I'm going to say 95% warehouse and distribution.
Okay, so this next question is for all of you. When you think about attraction and incentives and abatements, what is available in all of your worlds? How do you try to navigate the available incentives as you work with your clients or as you work with the city of Groveport?
Well, what's available is there's a lot of programs available in South Ohio or Columbus. You know, also pitching your tax abatement. Most clients like that, which is 1075 in Columbus. And we will a lot of times refer our clients to people that specialize in incentives. As a broker, we don't really handle all the incentives, but we'll refer them to the handle. There are a lot of incentives available.
The city of Groveport is divided into 5 different CRA districts. And if you're familiar with the CRA, Community Reinvestment Area, it is 15-year 100% abatement for a property tax. Prior to 1994, it was we call it a back-end incentive or an automatic incentive. Basically, it went with the land. When the building was substantially complete or when they received their certificate of occupancy, they would file a very brief application with the city would rubber stamp it, send it off to the county. When the rules changed in 1994 and it became a negotiated incentive because the school districts throughout Ohio were saying this isn't fair. We need a seat at this table. We need to have a say in the revenue that's being given away. The state legislature said we will allow all of the CRA areas that were created prior to 1994 to be grandfathered. And furthermore, you'll be allowed 2 amendments to that under the pre-94 rules. Every one of our CRA districts have been amended twice. So that means as we look into growth areas, we're not going to have that abated land. We're going to have to negotiate the incentives, and we have to look at how we do incentives now, simply because we don't have as much to give away with our revenue. So, I mean, it's been a very generous incentive, and honestly, that's what helped make the ground so fertile in Groveport. I think it was the availability of land, and not only was the land there, but it was tax abated. So it was a great deal for the developers. But we also do, for the buildings that the abatement has expired, somebody new coming into the market, we'll negotiate a tax credit, an income tax credit against the withholdings. It's nowhere near as generous, but it's kind of what we bring to the table to help leverage state incentives.
Yeah, so incentives, are, from a spec development standpoint, you need to have them. But as Jeff mentioned, I think that goal line has changed. A lot of our agreements these days, there's a school compensation agreement where we're also making payments to the school. Necessarily the pre-94 CRA didn't have to do, no job commitments, no payments to schools or anything along those lines. Communities in the schools have gotten, smarter and more thoughtful about it. So a lot of our new agreements have payroll thresholds, job counts, you're paying to the schools. So again, obviously we want to be good community members, but also we need to be competitive from not only the Central Ohio region from an incentive standpoint, but the Indy, the Louisville, all the other markets that are giving incentives. So the biggest incentive for the tenant is still by the tax abatement. And again, depending on the level of jobs, you can get some additional incentives there. But the biggest one that we always kind of push, at least to our clients, is the real estate tax incentive. The one thing that Jeff mentioned, when Duke started Groveport, obviously there's all those incentives, but that 15 years has burned, and I think it's been it'll be an awesome process for for Groveport, because of now those revenues, those buildings are still full and they're paying full taxes. So while 15 years sounds like a long time, it really goes faster than you think, and then you can have that revenue for the city and use it in a lot of different ways in the community. So I think that's the message we always kind of say from a case study standpoint. When I was at Pizzuti, we started in Grove City. It was the same thing. Grove City was given the tax incentives. South Park was developed, and then those incentives started rolling, and then money started flowing to the city and let them do a lot of different great things in that community. So I think it's a good stepping stone for those communities.
So we'll have time for Q&A here in a minute, but I have a couple more questions for the panel. I can't make it through a logistics council meeting without mentioning Intel, so I have to ask, what impact has that announcement had? Phil, I'd like to start with you. What impact has that had? And in particular, as someone looks to buy or sell, have the appraisal numbers been offset by this announcement?
Well, certainly that's what everyone's talking about is Intel. We've been fortunate enough to do 8 projects in New Albany, which obviously weren't Intel driven. We just like that community, we like that submarket, and kind of what attracts users to that area. It's probably too early to tell what happens with Intel, but obviously we were talking with a few folks before of what's happened in Arizona, what's happened in Oregon, and their other previous plants. The things that I have heard is that this one in New Albany will be more master planned, more thoughtful. I think the other areas have been kind of grow as you need it. They're kind of doing it ad hoc. But I think probably the biggest need is probably housing. I think the retail amenities. Certainly there's going to be some supplier demand that's going to be needed out there, I think, to serve that plan. But I don't think it's New Albany centric. I don't think it's Licking counties. I think it's, to Jeff mentioned, I think it could be the entire market. Columbus is fortunate enough you can get anywhere 15 to 20 minutes, so I don't think you necessarily need to be right out there. I think it's certainly a dynamic change for Central Ohio, the state of Ohio. I think it's going to be awesome, but it's probably a little too early to tell what's going to happen out there. From the appraisal standpoint, we haven't moved out. I should have some demand behind that, so I haven't necessarily seen it affect appraisals, but it has created an excitement factor, given that you're going to have another captured demand driver out there in that summer.
Kurt, what did you see?
I see 2 things. Everybody's calling all the brokers that comes now, they want land in New Albany or near the end company. And we were joking this morning, we were talking, it's like, okay, hang on, I have the 40-acre piece I have, all utilities zoned and ready to go, infrastructure in. Let me give it to you, and not the 14 other guys that called me this week. So there's a lot of demand for land in that area. From an appraisal standpoint, it's hard. It's hard to know because it's changing so rapidly, and it's sort of a gold rush for land out there. But on the other end of the spectrum, we see some people that say, hey, look, I need some more house space now or in the future, and I don't want to be because of it to be competitive company with jobs. I want to be away from Intel, so I'd rather be in a Groveport, or I'd rather be in West End, or Grove City. So there's 2 different thought processes. But the demand from developers for land of all types is increased, and the price will go as well.
So Jeff, people are trying to get out of New Albany for real estate prices. Are they headed your way?
Well, Groveport's looking for land in New Albany as well.
I'm just going to speak for you at least, Jeff.
We want some of that. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, how that's going to affect us. We obviously right now, if some of these gold mine opportunities come to us, we're going to have to tell them the same thing that we tell everybody else. We've got nothing. But we want to get there. We've got to try to find a way to get there. And we've got to move fast, unfortunately. It's not always possible.
Okay, so one more question for you, Kurt. In this environment with everything so competitive, is there a lot of collaboration between brokers, or is it competition, or how friendly is the environment?
we're lucky in Columbus. I mean, we have a very friendly broker environment, cooperative with each other. It has been that way since I've been in business. Some other markets are not that way. But really, I mean, for the most part, it's a very cooperative market. We share information. And everybody wants to get a deal done for either their, or whoever they're representing. So it's a very cooperative market.
And Phil, one more for you. Is there a property right now that's either in the works or just completed that you're excited about?
Well, I think I mentioned we've got 2 million square feet under development. We've probably got another 1.3 million planned for Central Ohio. And again, a variety of different sizes and submarkets. You know, we got a piece we're planning down in the Rickmack area that's about 300 acres. I think I'm pretty excited about that location. But again, you got to get through entitlements and zoning and infrastructure and that type of thing. But you know, none of them are more exciting. Probably, obviously, New Albany is probably the most exciting, just given all the press that's out there with Intel. So, and see what happens with that. See where that's going to go. But,
And Jeff, as CODA plans to build a mobility hub or the excitement around whatever they're working on, can you tell us any details about that? What's in the works? Any timeline or any updates about CODA's hub?
I know they plan to start early 2023 on the mobility hub. If you're not familiar with what we're talking about here, CODA for a lot of years had some challenges in the Rickenbacker area. I think people were trying to figure out how to handle Rickenbacker, and CODA probably first and foremost. These are discussions we had for years and years and years about how we get workforce into the market that don't have reliable transportation. I can remember, back in 2005, 2006, having this discussion. In the past few years, the city of Groveport has offered its own transportation system. That's called GREAT, the Groveport Rickenbacker Employee Access Transit. Cute, huh? But it's been very effective because we handled the last mile door-to-door service that CODA couldn't do. Some of these buildings are as large as the town I grew up in, so it's hard to drop off employees at one entrance and they may work at the other entrance. So this is a challenge that we had to handle. In the past few years though, CODA has really stepped up, and there's a lot of things going on right now. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of dollars out there to be able to use for some of these projects. But one of the projects they're working on right now is, they're calling it the Mobility Hub, and this is a long time dream of mine, to have a facility where you could jointly house a lot of the services that people in the Rickenbacker area need. They need childcare. They need access to some of the social services they need, because some of these people are two-income houses and they're still at or below the poverty level. So they need to have, during the day, they need to be able to have access to some of those services. A market to be able to get off work, pick up something to take home for groceries. So this is, it's a pretty large facility. The buses will come in, they'll meet the other modes of transportation, and people will be able to access those services that they need right here at this mobility hub. So I mean, it's something creative that's happening, and it's really helping the companies out. Back in 2014, I met with Eddie Bauer. Eddie Bauer is one of our largest employees. They occupy 2.2 million square feet of distribution space in the city. If they were to leave, there would be a huge sucking noise in the city of Groveport. So you better believe when they say, hey, we need to talk, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk. So we met with them and they said, we can't have another peak season like we just had. They were literally running buses into downtown and picking people up off the street that wanted to work for the day. They were paying $7,000 a day to do this. They said, we can't do this. And there's also challenges with childcare. There's all these other issues. So we walked out and our city administrator was with me, and she turned to me and she said, I can see how you're going to be spending your next year. 1 year later, exactly, we had wheels on the ground with 4 routes, with buses running. So these are the challenges. The existing development is something we can't ignore. We can talk about wanting to do more, wanting to grow, wanting to keep going, but we've got mouths to feed, and we've got companies that we've got to keep adding. So we do what we can. Coda finally, and I don't want to sound like I'm bad mouthing Coda, because I'm not. They're an amazing organization, and they've been an amazing partner to the city as we, took this leap to take on this transportation system. They're realizing where they need to grow, where they need to fill gaps, and it's finally happening. So working together, we are kind of feeding the beast. We're just keeping things going.
And is that an existing piece of property that they're going to add this mobility hub, or are they building?
What's that?
Is it an existing piece of property, or are they building something for the mobility?
They're building.
Okay.
Yeah, they're building. The airport authority had some land available, and they sold it very cheaply to Mortsey. Actually, is heading up a project in Coda, working together. They are building at the corner of Shook Road and London Grosvenor Road.
Okay, so we're coming up on 8:30 here. Any questions from anyone in the crowd?
Any potential for a bubble in the commercial market? We're talking about, we all know what's going on in the residential market. I've got a 30-year-old son and his girlfriend who just bid 15% over, they bid $60,000 over a house that was going for roughly $400,000 and they didn't get it. I mean, it's crazy. But how long is it going to be before we see any type of bubble in industrial or commercial?
It's a good guess. Obviously if I had a crystal ball, I would tell you, but I think the fundamentals are still, just like you can't find a house, you can't find a warehouse. So, and they're not building a ton of houses. They're building some, but I think in the presentations where building permits are still half what they were before 08, 09. So I think it's going to take a long time for that to kind of work itself through. And I think it's kind of similar on the warehousing side. I kind of talk on those three demand drivers of, if these companies really do increase their inventories, consumer spending continues to go up, there's going to continue to be a demand for warehousing. And land is hard to find, and the supply is going to be kind of managed because of these constraints on the construction side. Now, with all that said, again, outside forces I think could dictate a lot. I mean, obviously I think inflation is something that we watched a lot, and that could slow things down a little bit, but right now it's maybe a year or two would be my guess. I wouldn't be surprised if late 23, early 24 things start to, it just seems too crazy and too much going on to not, just pause a little bit, but, so far we haven't seen, I don't know what your opinion is, Kurt, but so far I haven't seen too much.
Yeah, I agree with Bill, except I've been around a long time, you never see it coming.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always, if you did, the development would all stop at the right time. Exactly. Would never be oversupplied. So, is there potential for a bubble? Always. I feel like right now we're in a bigger spot because of the what he said, constraints on land. Some municipalities are pushing back now against warehousing, as Jeff referred to earlier. So, I think there's some forces that might keep that development and slow it down a bit. But there's always the risk of hitting the bubble.
It's going to come down. Just depends what.
And another quick one. I was interested in what Jeff said earlier because school districts always seem to be able to get their money, but they typically get the real estate taxes, right? But it's interesting that they're also negotiating for part of the sales tax, part of the income tax revenue, because the income tax typically goes to the municipalities, right? So the cities and towns can operate. So they're going to get the real estate taxes, and now they're trying to get part of the income tax too.
And we can't. As far as an incentive goes, if you've got an abatement in a pre-1994 CRA, we can't offer any type of income tax credit, just simply because we're giving half of the revenue to the school district already. So we don't do anything extra. We do one or the other. But most want both, obviously. But we're finding right now that incentives aren't really that much of a factor. The factor is availability.
I have two questions, I guess. One is, so I'm seeing a trend across the country in areas that are kind of landlocked, or there's not a lot of land left, where they're building upward, right? Even in manufactured distribution, if you look at Allentown, PA, where acreage is like $740,000 an acre, right?
Yeah.
They've started to build upward, and you can do that now with ramps and engineering and the technology and robotics that you talked about. Are we going to see that trend in Central Ohio, or is zoning so unfriendly here that that won't happen? What are your thoughts about building upward?
Yeah, I think it might be a while before it's here, but obviously they've been doing it in Europe and China, and they figured out. What I find is interesting is you look around where we are today. I mean, a lot of these were old manufacturing and they were vertical. Like we're kind of coming back to that because land is tight. So I find that interesting. I think the economics might be a little tricky just here. Again, the land's not 700. I think Amazon leased it, but we haven't seen a lot of those spec kind of multi-story buildings. The Amazon new facilities, which we've been fortunate enough to do a lot of build-to-suits for them across the country, they're all multi-story now. They're anywhere from 3 to 4 stories, so you basically permit them like an office building, which is interesting. And a lot of those are starting to come online. So obviously Amazon's thinking about it, and they're the largest player in this whole game. So if they're starting to do it, then I think others may follow. But I think multi-story here necessarily is probably a little bit of ways away. It's probably more on a build-to-suit standpoint versus spec right now.
My second question or thought is about, in general, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm going to talk about Delaware for a second. So the Berlin, industrial park and
It's not mine.
I know it's not you.
You would.
Talking about, I haven't heard anybody talk about Delaware at all today, and I know that they've gotten, there's not the access to the highways and what yet, but we know it's coming. So they've got the money for the infrastructure. Do you see Delaware, and I know that Ray, not to be confused with Ray Webster, superintendent of Powell and the Old Country Schools, he is very abatement friendly and he gets the developer side of things. Do you see Delaware being a player and up and coming?
Yeah, Kurt, I don't know. I mean, you know better from a tenant. I mean, obviously we haven't invested up there. We've done a build-to-suit a long time ago up in Delaware, but we haven't seen the tenant demand that wants to be up there. So again, we try to guess where the tenants want to be, and there's a little bit of a herd mentality of being in Rickenbacker because there's a great workforce. We didn't talk a lot about workforce today, but workforce is like the most important thing for these warehouses right now. So having this CODA hub is awesome for Rickenbacker. It only helps get people there. So obviously there's a lot of people up there in Delaware County. I don't know if they're necessarily the workforce that some of our tenants would be looking to use, but based upon the lack of available land, someone's going to go do something up there. The infrastructure is going to be there. I know there's stuff maybe going on at the airport that people are looking at. But Kurt, I mean, you might have a better opinion of where tenants are looking, but eventually I would see somebody probably doing some product up there.
Yeah, no, I think Delaware, the Berlin Business Park, they really want more of the flex manufacturing, higher paying jobs, and they're not really receptive to the bulk warehouse right now. I think if they were, and they could get the abatement, it would be there already. If you look historically where the development's gone, it's basically you go where you can get the incentives, the infrastructure, and the utilities. So if you can get tax abatement, you can get utilities and infrastructure there. That's where development's gone. You see what's happening right now. I mean, you still doing development commercial point. It's just down. You drive down, you think that's way out there. No one go there. Why is it developing there? Because they can get the abatement, because they get utilities, and they can get all the infrastructure and the abatements. There's other land out there that you look at not being developed. And that's because you can't get one or two or three of those things. So Delaware, I think they're really limiting themselves as far as what we go there. You would see, I think, some bulk development up there if that's the case. I mean, right now, there's a big development going up by the Dollar Tree north of Delaware, off 71, and there's a 700,000 spec building going up there, and they're planning for more spec up there. So I think it skipped there and went past that because there's not spec.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue, because we did talk a lot about labor and workforce. And Jeff, to touch on it a little bit with the CODA system going down towards Rickenbacker, and it seems like that's the number one thing that I discuss with all our clients is labor and where their workforce is going to come from. So I guess my question is, if you heard of any municipalities, and I know you guys do a good job with your vocational program down there, But I guess at what level is that being taught? Is that being taught at the high school level? Are you starting to infuse that in high school programs? Or at what point are you engaging students to get interested in, you know, warehousing or logistics?
Definitely high school. And it's interesting because you're at a point where these kids are trying to choose a career path, and they're being told college, and they're being told, do you want to end up working in a warehouse? Well, the fact is, they can work in a warehouse these days and make pretty damn good money. So there's this whole re-education that has to happen outside of just the traditional four-year college path. We have a really good partner with the vocational school there, but we also have a really good partnership with the high school. And the companies in the area have really opened up. They've become a lot more relaxed about hiring students. So kids 16 and 17 years old are starting to work, and they're starting to see an environment they never knew existed. So we are able to get some. I mean, workforce is always an issue. It's always because we're all competing for the same people. You know, when you're at 3% unemployment, you've got people who have some issues that are keeping them out of the job market. So it's hard to get those people in. That was a factor we had when we started our transportation program. Companies didn't want to participate because they were afraid if company A was paying $15 an hour and we were only paying $14 an hour, they're going to talk on the bus and they're going to jump ship. But yeah, I mean, the schools have been really good. They've worked really well. The school district took some time to catch up, though, which was surprising. I think all of a sudden they said, hey, we've got all this happening right in front of us. What are we doing to meet the needs of these companies who are paying taxes to help keep us going? So they're doing a pretty good job. A lot of forklift training, a lot of actually some computer training that helps with some of the robotics and some of the things that are going on in some of the newer companies.
These companies are chasing land, but there's not affordable housing in those markets. So as an employer, we struggle. I mean, I think the growth first people chase is the closest thing. And I know Redwood is developing, but that's luxury apartments. Is there a plan or a relationship there to provide affordable housing options for some of these employees?
Yeah, so our commercial point development or macro exchange is probably one of the better case studies. So MI Homes, bought a portion of the Foxfire Golf Course, and they remember how many homes they built already, which I think they've sold all of them. But when Bath and Body Works came and leased our first building there, they saw that community, they saw the housing continue to come, south of Grove City up 104, and then there's more planned in that area. They're like, this is great because I can put, job flyers in all these houses, and these houses are, back to affordability. I mean, they're $300,000 to $450,000 houses. So obviously that's a whole other discussion of that affordability. There's challenges at every different price point in our market. But where in the past we say, having a warehouse next to housing maybe is not necessarily a good thing, but if you look at a map and you see a bunch of households around your warehouse, again, it's easier to get to work. You don't have to get on 3 buses to get into the system. So the more houses that are around your development are a pretty big driver. And we saw that play out when Bath and Body made their decision to come to our building, that they really liked having those housing options there. They liked being close to the housing in Grove City to pull labor down from that submarket. So I think it is important, and not only housing, but it's retail amenities too. Like, okay, you don't have that long for a break, but we need to have a place to have some, grab a bite to eat and, take some time there. So there's a lot of different amenities that still need to get filled in from that standpoint.
No, I agree that the shortage of affordable housing, I think, even single-family homes as well. But and this is my personal opinion, but if you look historically at these communities, if you look at the after-war houses in the late 40s, early 50s, there was a lot of 1,200 square foot houses, 1,500 square foot houses. That I grew up in a house 1,500 square feet with 1 bathroom, 3 bedrooms, and we survived. And no communities want really the smaller, affordable homes, and that's an issue, at least in my personal opinion. And you need those 1,200 square foot homes or 1,500 square foot homes that these people can work at those who work in a warehouse, and now they're making, upwards of $20 an hour, 2 people working, they're gonna afford that house, to buy a house. That's how they can move up. Same thing with the apartments. All the apartments now are being built with granite countertops, and all the amenities that everybody that they want, but it's hard to pay for. So I think there's definitely there's missing opportunity there. But some of it I think is municipal zoning. Municipalities don't want smaller houses, and or the affordable apartment.
There's a lot of talk around affordable housing. And Nicole, you're in the Groveport area as well. What we hear a lot of is the need to live where you work. For the community, it's not that easy. As you've heard me say, we're looking for land for development. So for the community, we're going to look at this and say, do we give this land up for affordable housing that is going to require more police protection, fire protection, more tax on the community, or do we continue to pursue this land for revenue generation? And so what do you do? I mean, it's a two-edged sword. We need it. There's a lot of people that would live there if they could live there, if they had something that was affordable. But unfortunately, affordable for a lot of the people in the Groveport area, the Rickenbacker area, can be a real challenge for the community, just in terms of the services we have to provide. So it's hard. We're giving up revenue to do it. When we had discussions with the city of Columbus about this area, Area C, they want us to turn over some of this land for affordable housing. That's tough, because a residential subdivision is not going to be able to afford the investment in the infrastructure that's going to be required to make that happen in this area. So we tend to look at highest and best use. Groveport has never really pursued housing. Our industrial development has far outpaced our residential development, where in the 20 years that we've been there, we've grown by about 3,000 residents, but we've grown by about 20 million square feet of warehouse and distribution space. So the quality of life for our residents is great. And council wants to keep it that way, so there's not a real big drive to do that.
And I know in Ridge Park, we spoke to Crawford Boyd, they're doing some creative things, to your point, Nicole, of using square footage differently. So, 900 to 1,100 square foot apartments instead of 1,500. So it's more affordable, not necessarily because of the cost, but the cost per square foot. So there is creative ideas in the works.
From a tenant standpoint, are you seeing in our region, a lot of people expanding, or is it new tenants wanting to get into our market?
Yeah, Kurt, you might have a better idea. I think it's a lot of new company coming in. I think it's a lot of existing customers that are growing or getting new business lines, so it's probably a little bit of both. But the other thing, just from a tenant standpoint, inflation's obviously here. Rental bumps historically have been 2 to 3%. Now people are pushing 3, 4, 5%. So there's a little bit of a sticker shock factor there. But I'd say it's probably split 50-50. I mean, what do you think from a tenant standpoint?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a little bit of both. Prior to the market getting so tight with under 2% vacancy rate, we're seeing some of the flight to quality. It goes back to the labor issue. You're competing for people who work in the warehouse, and that you want to provide them a nice place to work. So we were seeing people going from Class B, C to some Class A products. So it's I think it's a little bit of both as far as the growth goes, but the flight to quality for custom type.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again, Phil, Kurt, Jeff, for joining us today. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to introduce Teresa Passwater from Sedgwick to come and close us out before the interview's done. Thanks.
Good morning. What a great conversation today. I even took notes. Thank you for joining us for the Columbus Region Logistics Council for the Industrial Real Estate Briefing. As Zaki said, I'm Teresa Passwater with Sedgwick, Business Development Director. We're a proud partner of the CRLC and a longstanding member of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Just a little bit about Sedgwick. You may be more familiar with us, our former name, CareWorks Comp. A year ago, we merged with the Sedgwick family, and that is a leading global provider for benefit solutions. So even though our name has changed, our service and our people have not. For over 70 years, we have provided workers' comp solutions to our Ohio clients and partners, such as the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Our goal at Sedgwick is to provide safe work environments, which allow us to save Ohio employers money on their workers' comp coverage. Columbus Chamber members alone have saved over $1 million annually on their workers' comp premiums through two of the biggest savings options, group rating and group retrospective rating. That's $1 million your fellow members are putting back into their pockets to invest in their business. We're proud to represent so many Columbus Chamber members and help them control their workers' comp exposure. We're also proud of partnership with the Columbus Chamber and be able to support great programming such as today's CRLC event. Again, thank you very much, and I will now turn it over to Don DePero for the closing comments.
Okay, morning everyone. How about another round of applause here for Kurt Berlin, Jeff Green, and Phil Racy. That was great, really informative. And of course, Zaki Bashir, who leads the Columbus Regional Logistics Council for us at the Chamber. I'm your president and CEO, Don DePero at the Columbus Chamber. Really, really appreciate you coming out. We gave you a Chamber of Commerce day out here too. Beautiful sunshine and great weather. Thanks to our presenting partners again, Schneider Downs and Ease Logistics, who are great. Our leader partners, Reveal and Wright Pat Credit Union, and our venue partner, Columbus State Community College and Blend Cafe. And thank you all, especially our great partners here at Columbus State. I'm going to recap a couple of our upcoming events because we'd love to see you. Our Business Drives Government Social Mixer. If you'd like to meet some members of our some of our elected officials, they'll be there, especially if there's, a piece of legislation that's, not very favorable right now and you want to lobby a little bit. That's April 27th at the Ohio State House in the Museum Gallery. Our next CEO Insights, that's our quarterly interview with Colleen Marshall from NBC4, and that's with Angela Petro. Angela is the CEO of Together & Company and the Sweet Carrot Restaurant. That's May 18th at the Ohio History Connection. And if you're golfers or tennis players, we'd love to see you at our annual fundraiser, our Play to Work, our golf outing and tennis invitational. That's Monday, May 23rd at New Albany Country Club, and that's a great event. We'd love to see you out there. Our Women in Logistics, which is part of our Columbus Region Logistics Council, that's coming June 23rd, and more available. To see and hear about any of our events, please visit columbus.org/events. That's columbus.org/events to learn more. Thanks again for being here. Appreciate your patience. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again to our panel. Thanks, everybody.